Hello and good evening. Welcome to India First, the show where we talk about India's growing interests and stature in the world. I'm Gautam Roy. Now, India is set to host the 8th BRICS Summit meet in Goa over 2 days starting the 15th of October. 115 events are taking place on the sidelines of the main summit to enhance multifaceted cooperation. Now, BRICS is a formidable grouping of the world's emerging economies of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. Together, they represent more than half the world's population and over a fifth, some would argue almost a fourth, of its GDP. Now, these countries have already come together to form the New Development Bank, or the BRICS Bank, which has started funding projects, and more steps can be expected in the coming days, where institutions will be created and strengthened, and there will be added focus on implementation, integration, innovation and continuity with consolidation. Now, just ahead of the meet, let's take a look at some of the global issues India is likely to raise and seek collective action on as far as the grouping is concerned. Now, if we talk about those issues, what we can expect is that we can expect some collective action against terrorism, which will top the agenda, where a strong call can be expected to be sent out for the isolation of those countries that use terror as state policy. There can be added focus on infrastructure, which is boosting infrastructure because India really needs that. Measures to ensure better trade facilitation and bringing down non-tariff trade barriers is also something that could be stressed. There could be greater emphasis on improving connectivity, such as visa facilitation. And idea of setting up a BRICS credit rating agency has also been floating around. And that's the standard one. Reforms in UN, World Bank, IMF and other world governing bodies. And there can be some collective action that can be stressed on the environment as well. An agreement could come through. So terrorism is likely to be a big focus, and what else can really emerge as far as India's interests are concerned? We're here to talk about on that issue. We have Ambassador B.S. Prakash. He's been in fact India's ambassador to Brazil, a well-known former diplomat. We have H. Vishwanathan as well. He's a distinguished fellow with the Observer Research Foundation, also a former diplomat. If I could ask you first, Ambassador Prakash, do you feel that terrorism is something that India will greatly focus on, considering what's been happening with Pakistan following the Uri terror attack? We've had surgical strikes, but day after day we see more terror strikes taking place or infiltration bids.
Of course, terrorism is a major subject on the international agenda, and it is certainly a priority subject for us. But I would submit that this is an issue on which whatever the practices might be, whatever the realities are on the conceptual aspect, on what we can expect in a summit like this, in a communique like this, there is not a great deal of divergence. I think all responsible countries and all BRICS countries, each one of them is responsible, though we might have differences on certain individuals, on certain issues, but they are all responsible countries. They would all agree that terrorism needs to be condemned. There has to be solidarity in terms of condemning it, in terms of taking action against it, in terms of counter-terrorism measures, also in terms of stating that no state should support terrorism.
Right.
So in terms of general principles, in terms of what we would see in a multilateral summit, I would expect a certain convergence rather than a divergence. Of course, we do know that with regard to individuals, like for instance Masood Azhar, China has put a block for the second time. With regard to particular countries, in this case with regard to Pakistan, the support is not unequivocal, we know that. But when it comes to a summit like this, when it comes to a meeting like this, you don't really go into bilateral problems. You try to find common ground.
That could happen on the sidelines in a bilateral meeting.
And in terms of the, yes, that's right. And in terms of the summit itself and what can come out of it, I think it would not be too difficult, I would think. But still, our intention as India, our intention will be to pinpoint to the extent possible, as much as possible, this aspect that apart from the general talk about terrorism, certain states which have been sponsors, supporters, providing safe havens, they should be, if not named and shamed, at least indirectly specified. And we will try in that. We'll try to go in that direction.
And do you think that is possible as far as going to the extent of saying that those who back terrorism with resources of all kinds should be singled out, should be isolated, and the points that India has been stressing, do you feel that that is likely to come across in the communique, in a declaration that might come about at the end of the summit, and that would help India's cause?
That is to me?
Yes.
See, in a summit like this, all the final declaration is done by the basis of consensus. So that's the most fundamental principle. So, as Ambassador Prakash said, in most of these communiques it will be a very generic statement. Even in the academic forum which I attended in Goa 2 weeks ago, because there is an academic forum before every summit where 50 scholars from all 5 countries join. If you see the final recommendations that the academic forum has given to the leaders, even there it was a very generic statement that we said that all the BRICS countries should first have a common understanding of terrorism.
Okay.
So India will try to push as much as possible to make it more specific, but I doubt very much whether there can be a lot of specificity on the countries or isolating countries or naming and shaming. That never happens in a multilateral forum like this.
But when you say common understanding of terrorism, is it also in a reference to the fact that there is a convention that India had proposed many years ago, and that still remains an agenda that is still pending before the entire world?
It is certainly true, and India will push for that. In fact, India has pushed that not only in BRICS forum but even in other fora, that an international convention on terrorism is the need of the day. And many countries do agree in principle. But as they say, the devil lies in the detail, and so far there has been no progress on this in the United Nations. And India will certainly try to push that. But how far we will go is the question.
If I could go back, Mr. Prakash, to the fact that you said that there is a large understanding, a common understanding of how terrorism should be treated by not just the BRICS countries, a lot of countries in the world. But they will not go into specifics, as India has been doing in the last few days, seeking action against certain individuals, and then of course a country specifically as well. Why do you think it's difficult for fora such as these, like the BRICS, to really go in and define what needs to be done?
No, actually, BRICS is a forum in which it can be done to a certain extent. I think there would be absolute convergence, because as I said, we are all responsible states, we are all states with we are stakeholders in the international system, international order. I think a moment ago we were talking about the international convention, the UN Convention on Terrorism. There the difficulty is with none of the BRICS countries. It is with certain states, mainly in the West Asia or Middle East, some of the Arab countries, which always said that the right to self-determination, for instance the issue of Palestine, is this a fight in which we can use violence, or is this branded as terrorism? So there were other difficulties with regard to the definition of how to differentiate terrorism from so-called freedom fight. At one stage in South Africa also had this problem, but then after Mandela, I mean, now it is an independent state. So that's a different issue. Here what would happen is that terrorism to some extent gets linked to political interests and political concerns. It's unfortunate, but it's a fact of life. So I think to the extent that someone might have reservations on naming individuals or on really specifying, as we were saying, that is because it would serve a certain political interest. To be very specific, I think if the reservation is from China to make advance with regard to Masood Azhar, it is because China, as we know in India, plays a certain kind of a balancing or imbalancing act between two countries. Relations with India is important for China. Relations with Pakistan is in some ways even more important. And it does this difficult balancing act. And these are small instruments with which China plays that game, if one can use that phrase. So that's why a continuous dialogue to push every country, and I would expect that with Brazil, with Russia and with South Africa, there would be less of a difficulty in what we are trying to do. So our effort, as both me and my colleague Ambassador Vishwanathan were saying, we will try to the extent possible to, in that extent, pressure China to see our point of view. It may happen one day, but again, you know, they are also the Chinese have been at it for a long time. So I don't think that we should have unrealistic expectations about what is to be done. But at the same time, I think it is our job. It is important for India to highlight this particular issue, and it serves in isolating Pakistan diplomatically, which is the larger aim.
And that bilateral then assumes even more significance, the one that Prime Minister Modi will have with President Xi on the sidelines. Ambassador Vishwanathan?
Certainly, the bilateral will be crucial, and in these kind of summits, what happens in the bilateral need not be and will not be reflected in the final communique. The final communique generally is the least common denominator, but I am pretty sure that President Modi, Prime Minister Modi will take it up very strongly with President Xi and put across a point of view of what India has been facing for the last 3 decades. And it's getting worse. So I'm sure there will be a pitch on that. But to expect that to be reflected in the final communique, I think it's too much of a stretch.
We'll take a short break at this point, and then we'll also talk about some other issues which of course will gain prominence and that India has been trying to draw the world's attention to, and this groupings as well. In just a bit, stay with India First.
People think techies are chained to their desks. Not me. I run UAVs. You know, drones. I have to say, it's pretty awesome. I grew up playing video games, and who would have thought that'll help me defend my country? Not my mom, at least. We get there first and see what's around the corner so that there are no surprises for the rest of the team. We go everywhere, working with the latest and the best technology, but no Facebook.
We are India's most exciting workplace, and we are making you an offer. The Indian Army. Live a life less ordinary.
खाद्य प्रसंस्करण उद्योग मंत्रालय कोल्ड चेन लगाने के लिए प्रस्ताव आमंत्रित करता है। आवेदन की अंतिम तिथि 17 अक्टूबर 2016। अधिक जानकारी www.mofpi.nic.in पर।
भाई बोले तो अपुन के एरिया में अपुन से बड़ा डेंजर कौन आ गया भाई? डेंगू और चिकुनगुनिया। बोले तो दोनों का गेम बजाते थे भाई। अरे पापा, कूलर में मच्छर की फैक्ट्री डाले ले क्या? ड्रम, कूलर, गमले, पक्षियों के बर्तन वगैरह को हर हफ्ते साफ करने का। टायर, प्लास्टिक के कप, ग्लास, नारियल के खोल में पानी जमा न होने दे। डेंगू और चिकुनगुनिया का मच्छर साफ पानी में पनपता है। मच्छर के काटने से बचे। बुखार हो तो पैरासीटामोल लेने का, एस्प्रिन नहीं। पर भाई ये बीमारी का पता कैसे चलेगा? सीधा है रे, बदन दर्द, सर दर्द, तेज बुखार, थकावट, बदन पे दाने निकले तो मतलब डॉक्टर को मिलने का, खुद डॉक्टर नहीं बनने का, समझा? वाह भाई, आप तो सचमुच के MBBS हो भाई।
रोशनी का सिर्फ एक ही नाम, सूर्य। सूर्य LED, खर्चा कम, चले ज्यादा, घर घर रोशनी का वादा। सूर्य।
Welcome back to India First. We're talking about BRICS in the context of India's global interests, and that summit is coming up. India is hosting it starting the 15th of October for 2 days, and we have Ambassador B.S. Prakash with us and Ambassador H. Vishwanathan talking about, things that India would like to push on the BRICS agenda. We've talked about terrorism. Let's talk about some of the others. India, of course, wants better trade terms with the rest of the world, and BRICS is one big forum for that, Ambassador Prakash, because huge trade imbalance is there between India and China in the first place, and India would like that to be addressed. Do you think that is something that could be a focus here in this larger format?
Yes, I think the context in which this discussion would take place is important, because if we see what's happening with regard to India's trade policies, I think without doubt we are becoming more and more liberal, a more liberal trade regime. We are seeking not only access for India's exports, but we are also liberalizing in terms of imports. We are a huge market, not only for BRICS countries but for others as well, and we are opening up. So I think the way to see it is that trade and investment have become related. As you said, we have a trade deficit, a major trade deficit with China. And we are saying that yes, we will be open for Chinese exports, for instance. It would be true for Russia and Brazil and South Africa as well, but also come and invest in India, because I think trade also grows through investment, and we have liberalized that. With Russia, it's a different kind of a relationship. It's a long-standing relationship with regard to defense supplies, with regard to energy supplies. With regard to Brazil, it is growing. It's about $10 billion now, but still Brazil is an agricultural superpower. And if you were to look ahead, for instance, pulses in India, we have started importing pulses.
Right.
Where will it come from? From a country which is rich in water and in agricultural resources. Similarly, there might be other items with regard to South Africa. So I think the aim is to look at a win-win situation. But you're absolutely right. I think a trade deficit and domestic lobbies also play a part. So I would suggest that we look at this cluster of investment and trade and opening up of the economic space together and connectivity as well, rather than only look at trade.
Because Ambassador Vishwanathan, even today our Commerce Minister said that we want better access to Chinese markets, and that is only possible in a regime where China looks more favorably at opening up further, and not just looks at the fact that there should be a free trade agreement amongst BRICS countries, because that may not lead to the kind of equitability that India wants.
A free trade agreement between the BRICS countries is a non-starter, at least as of now. All the other 4 countries are not in favor of it, even though China may want to have a free trade agreement. Obviously, because of the huge trade deficit that they have.
Right.
And a free trade agreement will only help to increase the trade deficit rather than decrease it. But trade and investment has been an important issue of discussion in all the 7 summits. And this 8th summit, I think they would concentrate more on improving intra-BRICS trade by tackling the non-tariff barriers, for one, and greater facility for businessmen to have greater awareness of each other's economies, and also greater interaction, so that there will be more investment.
Travel facilitation as well.
Travel. And they are talking even of long-term visas for businessmen from all countries to travel.
Long-term visas, visa-free travel, of course, visa on arrival definitely there.
But as a group, there is also another important question that the BRICS countries will tackle. It is not related only to intra-BRICS trade, and that is a concern that the BRICS countries have as far as these mega FTAs that are coming up, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the TTIP. And the BRICS countries, all 5 of them, feel that this is undermining the legitimacy and the importance of the WTO. And the 5 countries will push for bringing WTO back into focus as the premier organization for all trade and investment matters in the world.
I see. And as far as the environment is concerned, Ambassador Prakash, do you feel that we will see further progress on what these countries have themselves promised to curtail as far as those goals are concerned? Because COP21 has just come into being, and now the focus is shifting to Marrakesh.
I think we have seen major developments in the last few months already. I think during the G20 summit, when US and China announced or announced their intention to agree to the protocol, that was
and
a
India
big
followed
step,
soon after
and we
on
followed
Gandhi
on
Jayanti.
October 2nd on Gandhi Jayanti. So that is resulted in this coming into effect. It's a very big step. I think there are challenges as well. I think particularly for countries like India and South Africa, I think there are challenges in meeting these targets, and also the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs they are called. I think the financing of what we need to do to meet these targets with regard to carbon emissions, that is another challenge. So I think the difference between a meeting of the G8 of the developed industrial countries, a meeting of the G20 in which both sides are present, and a meeting of these 5 in the BRICS format, where there are both oil producers like Russia and Brazil to a certain extent, and then big emitters like China and India. It's a different kind of a discussion. So I think the spirit of it, I would think, is that how do we all with divergent interests stay on course to meeting these, and how will those who need financing for meeting these targets? How will those be fulfilled? There are many aspects to these agreements. One is meeting the carbon emissions goals, the other is financing, the other is mitigation, adaptation. So I think it is a coming together of divergent perspectives.
Okay, and do you feel that's where again an issue which has become a bit of a bilateral sticking point between India and China could come up on the sidelines with that in that bilateral with China, which is our entry into the NSG, because that is something that India has said is needed if we need to meet our goals of non-conventional energy.
I'm sure it will come up in Modi's meeting with Xi Jinping, because that is one of the outstanding issues and a very important issue. And we'll have to see how China's reaction would be. But as a group, BRICS would certainly press for two things. Even though all of them, or at least most of them, have ratified the Paris Convention, still the fact remains that for countries like India, coal will be the bread and butter of our energy production for a long time to come. So there are two aspects to it. One is we need finances from the developed countries, and the other is we need technology at affordable prices, particularly clean coal technology, by which we can reduce the carbon emission. In fact, it is said that if we improve the efficiency of our power plants by 1%, we will reduce the carbon emissions per year of what Holland is emitting. So that is the criticality, that we need what is called the critical technology in coal.
And do you think BRICS is an apt vehicle to press for that technology sharing and of course resources that we require?
I think there is, because BRICS is still considered an influential group. The OECD countries have started recognizing BRICS as a good interlocutor to see development and growth from a developing country's point of view. So we have a chance of pushing this case.
Okay.
But BRICS countries are committed now to environment, and in a long term I think it is in their interest also to cut carbon emissions.
Okay. And which are the other fronts that you see, Ambassador Prakash, that BRICS countries could focus on? Because there's been some issues that have been raised as far as the conflict in Syria is also concerned, where India perhaps wants to do something that would be at least ameliorative of the situation there, and not finding a solution really, because we're not really a party to it.
Yes, I think there are some large global issues. Some of them are conceptual and therefore not immediately operational. But there are these issues on the global agenda where BRICS countries are large-minded. You very rightly mentioned Syria as a case. And in Syria, Russia has a particular interest because Russia is directly involved. But what is the issue there? The issue there is really whether a regime change that is being attempted by some countries to unseat Assad and not knowing what will replace him, what will come thereafter, is a good thing or not such a good thing. We have had the examples of Libya. Earlier we had the example of Iraq. So this issue of sovereignty, which is a classical issue, but let's say in the modern context, do you really intervene unilaterally or without thinking too much about it and then create chaos? So here I think most of the BRIC countries are like-minded. All BRIC countries are like-minded. I know from my own experience of Brazil how worried they are about the so-called, it's a good doctrine but it can be dangerous, responsibility to protect, what is called R2P. And Brazil came up with this idea of responsibility while protecting, which means when you are trying to protect people, don't do more harm than good. South Africa would be worried about it. Now China is a very staunch kind of a supporter of the concept of sovereignty and of not interfering in the internal affairs. India is a democracy. We know that there can be massive violations of human rights, but we are ready to. So this is one issue.
But there can be some consensus perhaps on the humanitarian aspect, that one needs to do something about this crisis.
Yeah, certainly there will be at least one para or maybe more on Syria, again in generic terms, of what can be done at least to bring peace for the time being. But the thing is that all BRICS countries are agreed on two basic principles. One is the sovereignty of nations, as Ambassador Prakash said, and this is the larger issue. So what BRICS is fighting for is, on the one hand, the sovereignty of nations should be respected, and on the other hand, on the international scene, there should be democratic equity of all nations. That is, there should be a kind of democratic behavior, not differentiating between big and small countries. That is what BRICS countries otherwise say, that the global order needs a change, because the global order that was built after the Second World War has become rather irrelevant today and outdated, and the world has changed. So there is need for change in the global order.
Okay, so we'll have to wait and see how this change is furthered as far as GOAS is concerned. Thanks a lot for joining us tonight to talk about what sort of interests will really India put forth. And we can see that terrorism will be a major focus to get these countries to agree on how to tackle terrorism, and particularly those that sponsor it among neighbors in other countries. And apart from that, a lot of other issues of global concern also to be taken up in Goa. We'll track that closely for you. Thanks for watching India First.